So thank you, Paul, for introducing me as the guy who's apparently going to get you all to lose your jobs once you've IPO'd. I hope the reality would, and of course will, for many of you, be very different. And if you were losing your jobs, I think you'd be losing them with an awful lot more money than you had to start with anyway. We heard a bit about information overload earlier this morning, so I'm going to try not to add to that unnecessarily. I'm not using any PowerPoint slides. I really don't like speaking to PowerPoint. So there we go. I read a very interesting article in the FT the other day about senior and really successful business people who don't take PR advice. Warren Buffett is one. Elon Musk, who runs Tesla, the electric car company in California, apparently is another. And I sort of read that and I kind of laughed and I thought, well, you know, good luck to them. Well, if you're Warren Buffett, then I suppose you have decades of learning it already. You've got that behind you. Maybe you don't need to hire spin doctors and so on. Although, you know, I do wonder in a crisis, what would he do anyway? I'm sure he would. But I think it's safe to say that any of you in this room, if and when you IPO, will certainly be taking professional PR advice, and not just taking advice from other people, but learning an awful lot yourselves personally about how to do it. Now, you may be thinking, well, I already know, and you may well be right for where your company is positioned at the moment. But once you go into an IPO situation, the kind of PR that you're doing, the kind of messages, changes completely. For example, about 15 years ago now, I left a cushy job in London, and with some other people, I set up a small company myself. It was a recruitment website, actually, in the days before those really existed. So I know a little bit from that experience, which was not terribly successful. We certainly never got to the IPO stage, about how SMEs try to do marketing and PR based on their own business. For example, if you're running a business selling fishing tackle, obviously your PR and your marketing is geared towards people who might buy the fishing tackle. Likewise, if your company manages events, then your PR and marketing is geared towards people who might come along and order some event management from you. Now, once you IPO, or once you think about IPOing, that perspective has to change completely, because suddenly you're not just trying to reach those people who want your business, or might want your business. In a way, really, you're trying to reach the whole world. And it can be literally the whole world, because once you IPO, you are opening your company to investors. And those investors could be fund managers based in Dubai. They could be individuals based in Dubai, or Abu Dhabi, or Saudi Arabia, or Kuwait, or London, or Singapore. Or it could be a fund manager based in Argentina, or anywhere, you know, maybe markets that you've never even thought about. So your whole mindset has to change in the way you're thinking about engaging with the rest of the world. It's a different audience, it's the same audience, but it's the same audience plus, because you've now got that different audience of investors and the general public on top of it. It's different messages you need to be giving, different channels of communication. You know, I'll come on to some of this. And also the sheer volume of it. You'll probably be doing much more marketing and PR than you do at the moment. So, by the way, just a quick word about what kind of companies IPO, because you might be sort of wondering, could this be for me? Maybe not. The market capitalization that you need to IPO on NASDAQ Dubai is $10 million. In other words, $10 million or more. So if your company has reached that, or of course if it might reach it in a few years, then you'd be eligible. Plus you need other things like 3 years of accounts. Well, you know, you'd expect that, that's fairly obvious. So the main thing I think is the $10 million market capitalization. So, I mean, that takes in an awful lot of companies that could potentially do it. Anyway, back to what you need to do. You need to start early. So, suppose you are at the moment a very small company, smaller than what I've described, not able to IPO yet, or maybe you have reached that level. Whatever, if you look a few years ahead, maybe you'll be at the IPO stage, and it's worth starting now to think about your communications and how you're presenting the company. I was a judge not so long ago in a competition for SMEs, you know, who is the most effective, who seems to be doing the best, etc., in various ways. And what really struck me, first thing that struck me, trying to compare the companies, was the difference in quality of their websites. Some were really good, basically, and some were really bad. And, I mean, you might think this is obvious for any business. You're trying to sell fishing tackle or something. Well, of course, you know, you want your website to look good. But it's worth thinking about specific things to put on it if you want to attract investors, not just people who want to buy your products. Now, there was a company that IPO'd the other day on NASDAQ Dubai. Its name is Emirates REIT. You might have seen it in the paper. I'm not sure it would qualify as an SME. It depends on your definition. Whatever, it's not a huge company. But I was aware for quite a while before it happened that they were going to IPO. So first thing I did, naturally, was go on their website. And I had a look at it. And I was immediately really impressed, because I thought they've got their act together. And specifically, how they had done that was they had really good bios of the chairman, the directors, advisors, etc. And what that does is give the reader confidence in who the company is. I mean, who's behind a company. If you're going to invest in it, any investor wants to know who is behind this. So simply putting something like that on your website can be very, very important. And this, you see, doing it early is crucial, because confidence is something that you build up over time. You can't just start doing this kind of thing 2 months before you IPO. Confidence is built up over years, basically. So the sooner you get into this mindset of putting certain things on your website and putting out certain messages constantly about the company that I'll come to, the better for you. Another thing I noticed that the company did was it put its ownership structure on the website. It said 28.3% of our company, this is pre-IPO, remember, 28.3% of our company or whatever is owned by such and such a person. Again, this inspires confidence in a potential investor. Now, I realize, of course, people don't always want to do that, and that there's a sort of balance there. That's understandable. Although, when the time comes that you will IPO, you know, that at a certain point, that kind of information does need to come out. But the fact that this company was so transparent about its ownership and the individuals behind it, I thought was really impressive. Plus, on their website, they told a very good story about the business. First of all, where it had come from, what it was for, what it was doing. They named the buildings that they invest in. It was full of useful, sort of juicy information that any investor would really want to see. And I would, if you're at all thinking of IPOing, I would encourage you to get that kind of website together if you haven't already. And of course some of you may well have done that. But it makes all the difference. So, you know, it's not just about highlighting the products that you sell, which you probably all do really well already, or services. It's about who are you as a company. If you're going to go public, everybody wants to know that. They want this sort of solid information about you. And the general information flow, this is going obviously beyond the website now, sort of push stories that you're telling. Also, it's a good idea to get that together well before you even think of IPOing, really, so that, again, the media know who you are, the public know who you are, including potential investors, because you'll be pushing a lot of your press releases and so on, probably towards the business pages. In other words, not just, you know, a trade magazine about the company, about the business you're in, which you may well be involved in already. That's great, and that should continue. But if you can also get stories about yourselves into the business pages locally and even internationally and onto the wire services, you know, the Reuters and the Bloombergs, etc., then again, you are preparing the ground. You're getting potential investors who might be absolutely anyone to know and understand and appreciate your company. So good PR advice is, at this early stage, for this very wide way of thinking in terms of engaging with the world and telling them about your business, is absolutely crucial. Now, you as the owner or senior person in an SME will, of course, be part of this, or should be, because if a company is going to know and understand, sorry, if investors or the public are going to know and understand a company, that company needs a face, an individual or individuals. So getting good public media training is probably a very good idea if you don't already do it. Meeting journalists is very important, you as a CEO or whoever, giving them time, inviting them in. I mean, I'm moving away from online, of course, now, because marketing and PR are not only about online, it all goes together. If you want a journalist to look at your press release next time you send him one, well, it really helps if he knows you, and if you spent an hour chatting to him, talking about your business, perhaps giving him a story, or perhaps just in background. You know, if he knows who you are, then when he sees your press release, he's much more likely to, you know, to read it and sort of give it a chance, as opposed to delete it, which is what happens to most press releases most of the time. So start all these things as early as you can. Another device that can be very good for getting messages out about a company is newsletters. I don't know how many. It'd be interesting to know who in the room has a company newsletter of any kind. Does anybody do that? Okay, some of you, yeah. I think that can be a great tool done right. Again, a newsletter can go sort of absolutely everywhere. You can be writing it about your business, but you've actually got an eye not only on what you're saying about your business, but who might be attracted to invest in the business later. So you can write it with that in mind. One issue with newsletters, actually, I think you've got to, it's very easy with social media generally to be very prolific and have a newsletter, for example, for the sake of having a newsletter. And I think monitoring the results of, or the outcomes of social media and who's looking is a crucial part of what you're doing here. Because what I'm talking about, obviously, is an increase in the amount, probably, of what you're doing, the general output of press releases, newsletters, blogs, and so on. I'm aware of one company which, for a couple of years, put out a newsletter to, I don't know, 5,000 people. And they didn't really have a way of monitoring the effectiveness of it, except anecdotally. So one day they got, I think it was sort of Google Analytics or something, they got Google Analytics to tell them who's actually opening the newsletter. Excuse me. And I think it was like they discovered about 30 people each month were opening the newsletter out of the thousands that they were sending it to. So they took the very sensible decision of simply canning the newsletter. They stopped doing it. I think they're now rethinking it, how they could do it again, but do it better. But I think this monitoring part actually is very important. It's very easy to just spew out an awful lot of information for investors and so on, without really thinking about the quality and without checking who's reading it. So to the extent that you can, it's very important to sort of use social media monitoring tools. Another tool that companies use to get the message out generally is blogging. Any CEO can have some cool ideas about something or an interesting angle, which is not really a press release, it's not hard news, so it's not something you send out as a press release. Just put it on your blog. Well, start a blog if you don't have one. Put it on your blog and your website. And then, and this brings me on to the next part, then you can tweet it. I've noticed working with IPOing companies, or companies that are listing on NASDAQ Dubai. We had another one at the back end of last year, actually, Bank of London and the Middle East. So I'm thinking of those two companies, that one and Emirates REIT particularly. I've noticed what an important role Twitter played in the pre-IPO and post-IPO story of those companies. I found myself increasingly going onto Twitter, searching Twitter, to see what people were saying about those companies. So I think in my experience, more than any other kind of social media, I'd be very aware of Twitter as a medium for reaching the wider world, including those investors. So I've got a little bit. How many companies here tweet as companies? All right. Yeah. Again, a good few. I'd have thought it might be slightly more than that. I think it's a good thing to get into. If you're not into it, it takes a little bit of work to understand it. You can't really work it out yourself if you're coming from a standing start. You'd probably need to ask someone in your company. It's bound to be someone who really understands it to help, and of course bring in professional advice as well later when you get sort of bigger and doing it more. I really think it's such an effective tool for reaching particular audiences, including audiences of investors. There's various things within tweets like hashtags and @things. Probably most of you know more about that than I do. But I noticed that IPOing companies are very clever and very savvy in the way that they use Twitter to get their messaging out. The tweet itself, of course, sometimes the point of the tweet is just the tweet, but so often it can lead to the press release, which otherwise might not be picked up anywhere, or that individual might not see it, or a clever photograph, or something like that. I think Twitter is a great tool for getting out to investors. So, just to go back to what investors are looking for, they're looking to understand everything about your company. Fund managers and people selling shares in IPOs often talk about the company's story. It's a sort of buzz phrase that they have. And it really is like that. If you're marketing your company to investors in an IPO, you have to be telling the story constantly about who you are, what you're doing, why you're better than the competition, who you're competing with. I mean, that could be sort of woven into what you're saying. And also, ahead of the IPO, your financials. A lot of companies clearly don't really publish anything about their financials. Why should we? We're not listed, they say. But if you're thinking of listing, or actually even if you're not thinking of listing for a long time, if you do publish some financials, again, this is all part of building confidence ahead of getting people to invest in you. So I would encourage you, if you want to take that step, I know again some people don't like it, do put your financials on your website, put them out in a press release, to whatever level you're comfortable with, and put your plans out, not vague ambitions, which doesn't usually impress anybody, investors being very hard-headed, but when you really have firm plans, for example, to move into another country, put it out in a press release. And then when you realize that plan the following month, put it out in another press release that you've done it. In other words, you're constantly telling the kind of stories that investors want to hear. Another issue that you may have to get ready to deal with, and you can turn it very much to your advantage, is criticism. I went onto the Twitter site of a listed company in Dubai the other day, and the company were tweeting about, they're good and wonderful, and other people were generally supportive. But there was a sort of conversation in there with a couple of people who were a bit critical of the company. So that is something that you'll have as part of this extra dialogue that you're creating with the public. And that is something that professional advisors, I think, can help you to deal with. And by getting into those conversations, you're actually doing yourselves favors, because you come across as transparent, you're having a dialogue with the company, and all of this goes back to the theme of creating confidence in who you are. You're not shying away from engagement with the public. Of course, not everything that is said about you is going to be positive. But you're not frightened of that as a company. Again, this is the kind of thing that investors like to see. It's the kind of image, I would suggest, that you want to be projecting. You're out there. You're very much in the public eye. So, yeah, you probably, or you may already have, excellent PR advice and marketing advice. When you IPO, that could be a very, very different world from what you're doing at the moment in PR and marketing terms. So, on top of the PR people that you use already, and these could be internal or external, you will probably need to hire professional capital markets, public relations advice. So you need to think quite carefully at the time who that's going to be. And even if you're thinking of maybe IPOing in a couple of years, it's probably worth engaging now with those people, just at the conversation level. Don't think they'll charge you. Just to get an idea from them about how they would advise you to spend the next couple of years in terms of positioning your company in the minds of the public, in the minds of investors. Just having that conversation at an early stage is really beneficial, and getting used to doing what you're going to have to do when you actually get to the IPO point, and also afterwards. Now, on the point of the IPO itself, I'll just go through the sort of timeline. You spend months, maybe even years, preparing, of course, but then things happen in a bit of a rush, and you've really got to be on top of your game when it comes to the marketing and the PR. So a crucial point comes when you actually announce what's called an intention to list, which means you're saying to the world, this is usually done in a press release, possibly with a press conference as well. You say to the world, we are going to IPO on such and such an exchange. You might not give an exact date, but you're really saying this is imminent. The world at that point needs already to have confidence in you if it's going to take this IPO seriously. And how do they already have confidence in you? Remember, these are not your customers. These people don't know you personally. They already have confidence in you because they've been reading in the papers, or they can go on your website, or they can go on your blog and immediately read all the kinds of information that I've been talking about that investors want to see: who you are, what your business is, who owns you, what your financials are. I mean, by the time we've got to this stage, just to say a month ahead of the IPO, this stuff really has to be out there. So if you're prepared properly, it already will be. And you as the CEO will be very comfortable now writing that blog, or maybe getting someone to do it for you, doing that interview, TV interview, print interview, whatever it is, handling criticism, etc. All these things. So, yeah, there are a few specialist PR companies in Dubai. I'm not going to name them. You can easily find out who they are, who are really good at this. I mean, there's 3 or 4 I can think of that have actually worked on IPOs that can really advise you, particularly at this sort of hot time just ahead of the IPO. It's really worth getting that capital markets expertise. So these people will handle with you the IPO announcement. Then there's a roadshow where you're selling with investment bankers now. You're actually selling the shares to investors at a particular price. You'll have your presentation, et cetera, specifically geared for the investors. And again, they will already be primed by the work that you've started doing from now to have confidence in you as a company, so you don't just come through the door as someone they've never heard of before. Then there's a pricing announcement. Then there's the IPO day itself, which can be really exciting and a fantastic opportunity for you as a business to really get your message out there to the world. Not just for the investors, but to grow the business itself. Because when your customers see that you're doing an IPO and doing it with this lot of razzmatazz and success, they're going to tend to think, well, that's a company that I can have confidence with as well in terms of it selling me something. Clearly this is well run, clearly investors are investing in it. I think I'll give this company my business. So it's a sort of win-win situation for everybody. The other day at the DIFC, we had Emirates REIT doing its IPO, and they went to town a bit, actually. It was a bit of a splash. They got some big banners, kabukis, I think they're called, that sort of rolled down the gate building, and the TV were there, and it made a fantastic photograph. And we got the ticker running ahead of the DIFC. It's 150 foot long or something. It's got the NASDAQ Dubai prices on. And the point of this really is kind of marketing and PR. I mean, it was celebrating a great day. But thinking how to get these messages out, it does take a bit of thought. It's a mixture of creativity and hard numbers. You know, you're impressing the investors, but you're helping everybody to have fun as well, including yourselves, by the way. It can really give a company a lift, a successful and successfully communicated IPO. Then afterwards, of course, well, now you're a listed company. And as a listed company, if you've got your act together already, you carry on pretty much the same way as you already have been. In other words, even before the IPO, you were giving out your financial information, or some of it. Post-IPO, you probably have to give out a little more. But you know, you were already talking to the world about your business. Well, you keep doing that now that you're listed. It's not necessarily such a big change. And this is all very exciting. I can see that for the people who are involved with it. Someone who, they've gone from running a business very successfully, obviously, if it got to the IPO stage, to being something bigger. They're not just running a business anymore. They have a bit of a sort of a public face. People come to them and ask their opinions, not just about their business, but the industry that they're working in. You know, they'll be asked for their opinions very widely by the media, et cetera, et cetera. So this is all very exciting for the people who do it. I can see the sort of transformation as the process goes along. And it's really beneficial, I think, for the people who do it, not just for their business. And you know, it really is all about communication. It's about how you communicate your company's story, and what channels you use. Like if you don't use Twitter now, you certainly will be using it by the time you IPO, and your whole business will benefit from that extra exposure. So there we are. So.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Very, very interesting. Can I just lead with a question for you? If we look at, say, markets in Singapore, Istanbul, Beijing, something like 40% of IPOs and public listings in the last year have related to companies which are themselves specialists in connectivity. So they are very much techno SMEs. Traditionally in the Middle East, we haven't seen much of the techno SME. I think it's starting to change. But could you say on NASDAQ, is there any significant trend or profile for IPOs in the techno SME community at the moment?
Well, in terms of our pipeline, in other words, companies that we're talking to who might realistically IPO in the next whatever, yes. I mean, we are, after all, NASDAQ. I mean, we're NASDAQ Dubai, but we're the NASDAQ name. NASDAQ is obviously known in the US. It made its own name in the tech field. we're very much aware of the opportunities. And there are tech companies in the Middle East, and I mean, not just in the UAE. I mean, Jordan, I think, particularly is known for it. So yes, very much. We do welcome stocks in that sector. And because there isn't much in that way that's listed in the Middle East, the first tech stocks that come in will have a fantastic advantage, because you see, investors like to invest in sectors. They don't want to put everything, they don't want to put 100% of their money into property or 100% into banks. They like to diversify. So if a new sector comes along, the tech sector, and there's only one or two companies in it, well, those companies are in a great position, because they're likely, or it's very possible, they will attract money just because people are looking for a new sector to invest in. And if there's a small pool of companies in it, then those companies are going to get looked at really hard by investors. So the first tech companies that start going public will be in a brilliant position, yes.
Thank you very much, Mark. Please, ladies and gentlemen, questions for Mark Fisher.
Hi, Mark. I'm self-employed. I'm not an SME, but I have a general question, long-term question. In this part of the world, for an SME, for their growth strategy, what would be better? Would it be an IPO focus, or would it be angel investors? I mean, should they consider the private angel investor route, or should they consider the IPO route as a growth strategy?
Yes, well, I mean, both can be right for different companies. This is, as we know, a sort of ongoing conversation. And it's not either or, by the way. A lot of companies can and do start off with an angel investor, venture capital, private equity, the various sort of parts of that spectrum. And that can be a great way to go to start with. It's simpler than an IPO, obviously. You don't have to do, you don't have to have a sort of accountants necessarily coming along quite so much. It can be, and sort of going through your books, it can be quicker. You can do it without going to the public eye. So I think there's a lot to be said for the angel investor route. And then at the end of that process, the investor, private equity, whatever, often does an IPO with the company that they're working with to realize the fruits of that success. So it can be angel investor, then IPO. That's one route. But of course, for slightly larger companies, I would say, remember the market cap of $10 million, you see, if you IPO, you're very much in control. I mean, with angel investors, maybe you sort of give up more than you want to give up. It all depends on the relationship and the negotiation. But with an IPO, you can say on NASDAQ Dubai, for example, I only need to sell 25% of my stock, because that's our limit. You can sell as little as that. In other words, you as the owner can keep 75%. You can stay in control when you do an IPO. And then what you get, obviously, is a lot of money for your shares, which you can then use to grow with, to expand with. So whether that's better than an angel investor, it just depends. I mean, you might get a much better valuation from going to the market, because the market, when it understands your company, might give you a much better valuation than the angel investor thinks you're worth. So if you believe in yourselves, go to the market and tell your story properly and see if they agree with you. Then you might get a much better valuation for your shares like that.
Thank you. Can you lose control of your company, considering you're at the mercy of the fund managers who will decide whether or not they're going to buy your stock? You maybe, as an SME owner, spent decades building up a company only to find that maybe there might be a fund manager, as has happened with some other companies in Europe, I know, who've actually lost control of their business. So they've lost the title of chairman, CEO, and have been taken off the board. Can you sort of give us a comment on that for here?
Yes. If you have given up more than 50% of your company in the IPO, or later, then yes, people can come along. They're majority owners now if they get together, or they can bully everyone else into agreeing with them, and you can be voted off. But if, like as you can do on NASDAQ Dubai, you've only ever sold 25% of the shares, well, nobody can come along and vote you off because you're still the majority owner. Now, they might still try to make a bit of trouble, you know, in various ways. They might sort of sell your shares. They might try to sell your shares for less than you think that they're worth. Companies do sometimes complain about the way the market is valuing them. But I think a confident, successful company sort of rolls with that. I mean, you know, it might be that a particular fund manager doesn't like your company very much, so you go tell your story to others, and if it's a good one, 3 other people will come along and say, well, thanks very much, this guy's selling his shares, well, I'll have them, and I'll pay a premium for them.
Mark, I'm just going to leap in there because I think you've just made a very interesting point, and this kind of relates to the thing that I mentioned in my introduction, doesn't it? That in reality, a very effective organization needn't be too bothered by that situation because it amounts to controlling bandit messaging, doesn't it? And if there are threats to sell part of your share issue at undervalue, let them get on with it because the majority shareholders will be protected by the positive messaging that you've already put out, and you'll continue to trade at a higher value in that case anyway.
Yes, absolutely right. Sometimes you see companies making statements in the press. We think our share price is undervalued. And I always think that's a bit of a silly thing to say, personally. I wouldn't go too far there with some companies I think of. I think it's much better, instead of to say that, just get your story out. Tell the world what you're doing, and the world will make up its mind about what your share price is worth. Just focus on that. And, you know, there might be ups and downs, but if you have confidence in yourselves and you know how to tell the story, don't worry too much about what individuals are saying or if your share price goes down on Wednesday, because it'll go up next week.
Mark, thank you so much for a really excellent paper. Please, a huge round of applause.